What's up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of Numbers Don't Lie. I'm Nico Cantor, and this is a show where it's data, stats driving the storyline. The biggest thing on the menu today is El Derby de Madrid. Atlético Madrid 5, Real Madrid 2. The biggest game in Spain. Something changed this weekend for Atlético Madrid, and we're going to dive deep into that. But I'm not the only one on the show. Over there to talk you through a lot more what we're talking about today is my boy, JayDee Dyer. What's up, JayDee?
Yeah, what's going on, people? It's your boy, JayDee. You know we're about to dive into the Champions League because we're back in action. And I know a lot of neutrals will be wanting this final from last year, Barcelona versus PSG. Well, it's the remix. It's time we finally get it. But there's a few familiar faces that probably won't be involved this time round. Dembélé's missing because of injury. Raphinha's missing because of injuries as well. But it doesn't matter because we're going to get the game that we've all been waiting for the longest while to really crown who is the kings of Europe. But talking about king of Europe, on this show, you know we pay homage to the legends. And of course, Nico, you got someone against the wall that we need to dive into their figures of their career.
Yeah, absolutely, because Sergio Busquets, the cornerstone of the most revolutionary team in modern football, is retiring. He's hanging up the boots. He announced at the end of this MLS season, he is saying goodbye to the beautiful game. Champions League winner, World Cup winner, and we're diving deep into the numbers to understand if those stats really prove if he was the best holding midfielder, el best 5-6 in English of all time. But what's up, JayDee?
My dog.
Our main storyline of the day is this man and what he did different in the Derby de Madrid, because Atletico really needed this one.
Different level, different energy, different intensity, and utilizing the passion. That's all the things that the eye test could see. But Nico, I can't wait to dive into these numbers, because when you dive into the numbers, you knew that Chulo had so much pressure on his shoulder going into this one.
Well,
the worst start to a La Liga season under his regime. Come on!
Yeah, you had to get it right. Through 6 match days into that Real Madrid game, he only had 8th place, 9 points. That is not good at all. So you could imagine the pressure that he was going under, especially with the summer spent, with the money spent in the summer. Not only this one, but the summer before. Cholo had to get things right because it was absolutely abysmal.
Investment is everything, but I want to dive into the attacking numbers, because when you talk about money well spent, everything felt like it was catered towards the forward line. How can we revamp and revitalize what is this Atleti team? And Nico, when I dive into these stats and I see it all, across the first 7 games, this doesn't look like a team that has invested over 200 million euros into that front line. The shots, the goals per game, the expected goals, and of course the big chances. But when you compare it to your Madrid game, Nico, you tell me exactly how you feel.
For me, it's the big chances per game. You created 6 big chances in the Madrid game, as opposed to almost 3 in those games. And when you consider first 7 matches, you're also considering the Liverpool game. This needed to be an Atlético Madrid team that was fun to watch without any concerns offensively. Go for it. Go towards those games. And I think if we look at where they were passing the ball, especially in the last 3 games, when things started to turn around a little bit more, you could tell that they were on the front foot. They were searching for those games. So if you compare the first 5 matches versus the last 3 matches, Atlético Madrid perhaps was playing a little bit more in their own half. But look at this for the oranges. In the last 3 matches, and I'm talking about games against Mallorca, which they drew, Rayo Vallecano, which they won, and of course this Madrid derby, they're playing almost 60% in the offensive half.
But Nico, I need to ask the question, because the fans at home will ask the same thing. Well, this could have been against opposition that was sitting deeper, and this could have been against opposition necessary that was a little bit more exposed, like Real Madrid, who maybe want to be on the front foot. So how is it a fair comparison? What are you seeing?
I think in this particular situation, it is a fair comparison, because a lot of those teams in the first 5 matches are comparable to the teams in these last 3 matches, like Rayo Vallecano, like Mallorca, teams that you should be beating. And in those first 5 matches, there's a Liverpool. In these last 3 matches, there is a Real Madrid. So I do think the numbers indicate that Atlético Madrid is more on the front foot. They're a little bit bold, and I think you could attribute that to several players that are back in the starting lineup. Nico Gonzalez has started to feel comfortable in his role, and more than anything, Julián Alvarez, who is absolutely on on fire.
Well, let's just start with the initial question. Is this the most complete forward in world football at this moment in time? Because Julián Alvarez seems to be showing that he can handle the responsibility of wearing the Atleti shirt and, more importantly, leading the line. I mean, you think about some of the greats that have worn this shirt that have been forwards in the past. Diego Costa, Sergio Aguero are two of the greats that have gone on to do great things. You start thinking about your Luis Suarez and David Villa, who are maybe at the back end of their career, but still world-class in their own rights. But this guy right here is leading the world football in terms of what he's doing as a solo football. When you compare him to the top 5 leagues in terms of centre forwards across all of them, the matches speak for themselves, 64. The total minutes, availability is what? The best ability. We speak about it all the time. But the goals and assists speak for themselves. And this is where Julián Alvarez starts entering a different type of conversation, especially overall when I give reference to my boys from Sofascore and their goals, of course, is speaking for itself. Look, the goals outside of the box, the free kicks, which surprises a lot of people when you think about the fact that how many forwards in world football, Nico, are you thinking about that are taking free kicks and scoring direct free kicks overall? This guy is do it all. When I say do it all, I'm not talking about just on the ball, I'm talking about off the ball too. He is the heartbeat of this athletic system, but Juve fans, look away for half a second, because I know when you let go of Nico Gonzalez, you wasn't really expecting him to hit the ground running like this. And it's only when you start diving into the stats and you start recognizing how Julián Alvarez is with Thiago Almeida, and then of course comparison with Nico Gonzalez, you're seeing that Gonzalez and Alvarez relationship seems to be getting the best out of what I would say right now is the most complete striker in world football. What do you think, Nico?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's ironic too, because Thiago Almeida, they bought him earlier in the transfer window along with Alex Baena. Alex Baena was a huge signing for Atlético Madrid, but Baena has been out with appendicitis. Thiago Almeida has had a knock, so he hasn't been playing. And the guy they got way later in the transfer window, Nico Gonzalez, that's a different profile of player, less creative like an Almeida, less creative than a Baena, right? He's not that typical 10. On that left-hand side, he's going up the field. He's offering you a lot more offensively, and you could tell that with Nico Gonzalez, all these numbers keep on increasing, like touches in the box, key passes per game. They're taking more shots. They're inside the penalty area a lot more. So Nico Gonzalez, yes, Juve fans, this is not a joke. He's playing really well. He's much more like that Nico Gonzalez from Fiorentina that was able to put the team on his back, unlike his times at Juve. Our boy Marco Messina texted me and he's like, yo, is this real that he's actually playing that good? And the answer is yes. So if you're an Argentina fan and you didn't watch his time at Juve, you're thinking, oh, Nico Gonzalez hasn't skipped a beat. And look how much better he makes Julián Alvarez. This is Julián Alvarez's heat map, by the way. Where is the change? Look inside the box. And I think this alludes to Nico Gonzalez offering a lot more higher up the pitch, where Thiago Almeida will tend to want to come inside and combine like a 10 off Julián. But this Julián can get vertical, and verticality is Julián's biggest strength. Nico Gonzalez gives you a lot of this space right here, and Julián can combine inside of the box. And a striker inside of the box is exactly what you want a lot. Julián can do things outside of the box too, but you want your 9 close to goal.
So the most important question is this the most complete forward in world football right now? Looking at Julián Alvarez, overall, right now, fundamentally what he does both on the ball and off the ball, is he the most complete forward?
It's a good question. Complete, I think, also involves aerial ability, but for me, beyond the word complete, if you told me best, he's up there, right? I don't know if Julián right now, or at least in the last 2 years.
Do you think he belongs on this list?
Absolutely. I don't think he gets mentioned in the same conversation as a Harry Kane, as a Lewandowski, now Dembélé, who's the Ballon d'Or winner, a Kylian Mbappé. I personally think Mbappé is on Mbappé and Haaland, different category of their own. By the way, top 5 rated center forwards, Haaland is 7th on this list. But mind you, I think Kylian Mbappé and Haaland are a completely different echelon of striker. Then come your Kane and Lewandowski, Julián is right there. I think he has the strong potential to finish as a top 3 Ballon d'Or candidate in a year's time.
I mean, consistency has been a bedrock of him. We just needed to see the minutes and also a system that is catered towards him. Now that he has a system that clearly Diego Simeone is saying, you are my pillar, you are my number 9.
Yeah,
this system
my
is
best
created,
player.
and my best player, we're about to see the best version of Julián Alvarez.
I'm thinking of a 9 for Atlético Madrid that was in that Ballon d'Or conversation on a podium, by the way, with Messi and Ronaldo. It was Radamel Falcao. it could be the second coming and just a different Latin American.
I like that. But talking about the Ballon d'Or, it's time we give our flowers to someone who's just picked up the honour most recently, and also someone that's in the conversation. Neither will be in the game. How will their teams fare? We'll dive in.
Hey, welcome back to Numbers Don't Lie. JayDee Dyer, Nico Cantor, ready for the next topic of conversation. I know these guys aren't going to be available for their respective teams once PSG versus Barcelona comes around this week in the Champions League, but who is going to miss their talisman the most?
I mean, we're going to dive into the numbers, but first of all, Nico, can we just take a moment to acknowledge that this is the Champions League final that we both wanted as neutrals? You're talking about excellence on show. Both of these two individuals have had incredible seasons last year, but can they replicate it? I mean, coming back from injury and availability is an important question, but who's the most important is going to be another factor. And you know I'm going to defend my boy Ousmane. You know what time it is, because you have to defend the king. But I know you've got a different verse of opinion.
Yeah, I'm going to stand on the Raphinha side of things and throw some love to the Brazilians that are watching us. So give us a comment on the YouTube. Kind of crazy to think that this guy finished 5th in the Ballon d'Or voting. He put up better numbers than his teammate, Lamine Yamal. So let's take a look at how important Raphinha is to Barcelona. He actually hasn't played in only a handful of games. It's only 5 games in which Raphinha did not play. But you see how in games, Barcelona are producing a lot. Without Raphinha, they're actually winning a little bit more points per game, but they're scoring more when Raphinha's on the field. They're creating bigger chances, more big chances when Raphinha's on the field. And then if we go to the next graphic, perhaps these numbers are a little bit more comparable. Obviously, when you don't have Raphinha, you still have Lamine Yamal and Lewandowski. So the numbers don't drop off that much in those 5 games that Raphinha didn't play. Like shots per game, sure they're creating a little bit less, but the touches in the box, like 33.2 versus 32.2, it's all pretty similar. Coming to say that Raphinha plays with a pretty stacked team, but his influence is absolutely undeniable. Actually, if you look at his Champions League season, he had better numbers than the Ballon d'Or winner. JD, talk to me about that.
And we say it sometimes, you know, men lie, women lie, numbers don't. Well, this is one of those where you have to do the eye test, because when you see this man right here, you have to start referring to him as the king. He is the Ballon d'Or champiano at this moment in time, because his season was nothing short of exceptional. You're talking about Luis Enrique managed to unlock a system where Ousmane Dembélé looked like the best player in the world. And when you see the stats, they weigh up, because when Dembélé is there, you see the points per game, you see the goals per game, and the big chances created. This is significant when you think about Dembélé playing 57 matches, which is so critical in terms of people questioning his ability and, more importantly, his availability. It's without Dembélé though, and of course 16 games is a long part of the season to miss, but it's the points per game, the goals, the big chances that tell me, again, much like Raphinha, he's in a stacked team. You're talking about Ballon coming off the bench, Doué coming off the bench. There's impact and influence throughout, but let's not forget what the king has done, because Dembélé, rightfully so, is the best player in the world. He's been crowned as such, and you can see the impact that he has when he's present. The penalty entry is a big factor here. 29 per game? Whew. Now you're talking. Your shots per game is another thing. Touches in the box, of course, he wants to be progressive, and the key passes all speak for themselves. Ousmane Dembélé has been crowned the Ballon d'Or winner for a reason. And there's a reason that he's going to showcase once again in this PSG system. I know, Nico, you've got your question marks, right? I know there's going to be factors in for discussion. But what I do want to turn around and say is, sometimes we have to acknowledge the king. Yeah, and Ousmane Dembélé is the king of world football at this moment. So you have to break it down to me with more detail. I want to understand why you feel like Raphinha is going to have a bigger impact in terms of his absence in this game.
Le Roi Dembélé, the king. Listen, I do think after seeing the numbers that you showed me that Dembélé is more important to Barcelona than what Dembélé is to PSG than what Raphinha is to Barcelona. Although I think Raphinha has an incredible influence on the Barcelona team, playing a lot, played more than Dembélé, and scoring a lot of goals in important games. His goals and assists, his goal involvements was more than Dembélé's, for example. 37 goals and more assists for Raphinha, for example, when you consider it compared to Dembélé in a more difficult league. But obviously, when you're telling me Dembélé is more important to PSG than Raphinha is to Barça, and PSG ended up winning everything, I understand now why he kind of is that poster boy of PSG. I understand it even more now, and I guess in a way it justifies why he is the rightful Ballon d'Or winner, if you will.
It's the story, it's the narrative. You know, in this game, as much as we love the numbers, the narrative is important too. Him returning to Paris with the question marks over his ability, could he step into the fold in the absence of some of the world-class players that have left? Ousmane has stepped up, and especially I want to highlight one thing to you, the goal involvement. That tells me in terms of how important he is to this system. Over 34% tells me fundamentally I know Dembélé is involved in all of the positive things that PSG does in the final third. And I'm also going to say one thing. How good is it that we can see 65 and 57 in terms of availability for both of these two players who have had injury histories in terms of respectively
Pretty incredible. I mean, especially Ousmane Dembélé, right? Who was the king of injuries. He was the gingerbread man of European football, basically, especially for the talent that he had. But it comes to show you that I think Raphinha was wronged for finishing fifth in the Ballon d'Or voting. It's kind of crazy because look at the numbers. They're almost identical. Raphinha was huge, the influence. It felt to me kind of crazy that the final, if you will, number one and number two, was Ousmane Dembélé and Lamine Yamal. Because if you look purely on the numbers, Raphinha had a better season than Lamine Yamal, but there's something about emotion, right? It was that emotional vote that perhaps swayed people to vote in favor of Lamine Yamal over Raphinha because his influence is undeniable and he should have finished higher than fifth place in the Ballon d'Or.
Just quickly before we throw to break. Does the eye test tell you any different to what the numbers tell you? Do you still believe that Raphinha is more important in terms of to this team in the absence or than Dembélé?
No, I think he brings something to the table for the eye test because he's always there. You know, he's always pressuring. Eye test also tells me that he's more important to PSG than Raphinha is to Barcelona. But you got Lamine Yamal and Lewandowski, like.
Can you believe?
Come on.
I changed the mind of Nico Cantor live on set. Hey, right now I'm done. I'm over. It's over already. But you involved in the comments because we want to know who do you feel like is going to have the bigger absence in terms of between Raphinha and Dembélé? And more importantly, get involved in the next segment because now it's time to discuss legacy as we dive into the career of none other than Sergio Busquets. Welcome back into Numbers Don't Lie. You know, you're with your boy JayDee Dyer, and this is my favorite part of the week. You know why? Because it's the WTF stats of the week. Yes, we've got some absolutely rattled off for you, just holding in the weights, because I know you want to head a debate in terms of around Sergio Busquets and his legacy, but we have to rattle off some of the things that have been happening in the footballing world this week. And there's no better place to start than with Captain America. No, I'm not talking about Anthony Mackie. I'm talking about this guy right here, Christian Pulisic, who seems to be finding the same form that we've seen in an AC Milan jersey for a number of years now. And the reason why I say that is because look at his start to the season. Most goals and assists in a Milan shirt across the first 7 games since the 15-16 season. And look who's the top 2 up here. Shout out to Olivier Giroud, of course. Olivier Giroud does what he does best. But Christian Pulisic, both number 1 and number 2, really speaks about how Captain America is shining down in Milan at this moment. Now watch this. I want to flip it because we want to go from Italy to England real quick. And look at this stat to take you away. I love this one, and shout out to Christian because you do deserve your honorary moment. But this one is everything that I need to see because look at the EFL in the rounds of 6 in terms of 90+ minutes. The top 5 leagues, you've already seen it. And I wanted a disclaimer. This is probably why I haven't done this well in fantasy this week because as you can see, there's last-minute goals that are changing the outcomes of games all of the time. We still have Everton and West Ham to play, which could take this over the edge. But this historically will be remembered in terms of the round 6 fixtures in the Premier League forever. Nico, take me away with some of your favorite stats this week.
Okay, I got one for you. This one's also concerning a player specific in the Premier League. I look at Manchester City and I go through their list of top goal scorers and I do see one guy up top. And to no surprise, it is Erling Haaland. You see him back there. He leads Manchester City goal scorers with 8 on the season. And then the next players are Shirky, Reinders, Nunes, Foden, every single one of them with 1 goal. But I add those numbers and I get 12, and I know that Manchester City has scored 14 goals in this Premier League season, but it's Burnley's Maxime Esteve who has 2 own goals, and that means that he's Manchester City's second highest goal scorer this season behind Erling Haaland. Pretty incredible. Maybe an area of concern, JD, for Manchester City? I'm not too sure.
I'm never concerned when it comes to Manchester City and goals, just because they do what they do best, right? They finish. When Erling Haaland gets a chance, he definitely does what he does best. But I got another one for you. Look at this one in terms of stats for the week. This one's going to make you smile because I think it's got a kind of a different gear to it. When I really look at the promoted clubs in terms of that have come up this year, and people have had their question marks around the teams that have been promoted most recently. But Sunderland, Leeds and Burnley are setting the standard to show that the gap between the Championship and the Premier League is very close at this moment in time. They're reminding me, Sunderland, of that Ipswich team. Remember that team from 2000, 2001, of course, had Marcus Stewart, who led the line, did so exceptionally well, finished 5th. Let's see what happens with Sunderland this year, but nobody can take their start away from them. Talking about starts, Nico, take me away with the finish for this week.
Yes, absolutely, and this one concerns Andre Onana. You guys are going to have a laugh about this because in his last 2 games, he has more assists than saves. 1 assist, 0 saves. Yes, 4 goals conceded. Funny enough, though, Trabzon didn't lose any of those 2 games. In fact, the game in which he had 8 saves, which was his very first game in a Trabzonspor jersey, was against Fenerbahce, and they ended up losing. But he was phenomenal in that game. But it's just kind of anecdotal. It's funny that in the last 2 games, the goalkeeper has more assists than actual saves, but maybe things do get better for Andre Onana, better than at Manchester United.
Can't get much worse, can it? Well, Nico, talking about people whose careers definitely deserve to be heralded, this is not just a stat for this week, but a stat for a lifetime. It's Sergio Busquets, who, of course, has announced that this will be his final professional year of football. I just think when we talk about his accolades, we talk about his legacy. Where's Sergio Busquets? Is he the best defensive midfielder in the history of world football?
For me, he is. And his trophy cabinet speaks for itself, right? With the World Cup and the Euro with Spain, you've got a bunch of leagues, you've got Copa del Reyes, you've got 3 Champions League, 3 Super Cups, 3 Club World Cups, and then even with Inter Miami League Cup and Supporter Shield, I mean, those are skippable compared to the weight of the other ones. The numbers in his career, it just adds to the amount of club trophies, the national team trophies. 19 goals, 62 assists is actually pretty incredible. I didn't expect it to be that high considering all of the offensive power in the midfield that Barcelona has had over the years, but clearly he was very involved. The longevity of Sergio Busquets. Obviously in this later part, if you want to hate on Busquets, you might have some recency bias, but if you were alive and had like proper football knowledge, and I'm not talking about 5 years old and watching Busquets, I'm talking about like, you know, as an adult, you remembered the best era properly of football, in my opinion.
You know what, I can't argue against you in terms of the best era of football. What I will say, though, is how good his man cave must be. 34 trophies, where are you putting all of those? Do you spread them between Barcelona and Miami, or do you just say to yourself, I'm just going to leave them everywhere, I'm going to have them all together?
How do you even create a room big enough for all of your laurels? It's this guy, superlative, next level.
But I'm going to tell you this now, Nico. This is where we open up the conversation, because the question was very carefully defined. Is he the best defensive midfielder in the history of world football?
You don't think so?
I do not. And let me explain to you why. I am going to give him his flowers.
Get out of here.
These speak for themselves. But sometimes the eye test is also important when we're talking and breaking down these numbers.
Who's that Pokemon?
Matches and goals, semi-finals and titles, they're all going to Sergio Busquets because he has been a defining factor in terms of in world football over the last 15 years. Tackles, duels, defensive play, passing completion. I cannot take it away from the Spaniard, but I will say one thing. When I'm talking about the definition of a defensive midfielder, I want to see these levels in terms of tackles. I want to see the duels wins. I want to see you winning your battles in the centre of midfield. And of course, the pass completion is always going to be there because you're playing in the centre of the park.
92% pass accuracy.
Unraveling in terms of the debate and the conversation, because I want to take people down a quick question down memory lane really quickly. Yes,
that's all you need to know, guys.
It's fantastic, but it all depends on what you want in terms of as a defensive midfielder. As you can see, the heat map speaks for itself. Busquets is impacting the game in all different aspects, right? Talking about just before in terms of his final third, in terms of protecting his back line as well. I'm loving them in terms of what I'm seeing from Busquets. But come over to my surprise package for a second. Concentrated in the middle, heavy on the defensive side of the game. And I'm going to turn around and say this is where he's made his bread and butter, because men lie, women lie, but numbers don't. And also, what's important when you're talking about numbers is talking about legacy. Sergio Busquets can put himself into a different plateau. But I want to open up the question in terms of the question mark around what does a defensive midfielder have to do? There's one player in the history of football that has had a position named after him in this role. Yes, I'm entering the conversation, it's Claude Makelele, because the titles speak for themselves, but talk about a player that has redefined the position. Talk about a player that had impact on both Real Madrid and Chelsea. I watched Claude Makelele come to the Premier League and really change the way managers across the league and across world football had to tactically change their approach. He reinvented the 4-3-3 because of what he brought at the anchor position. His ability to intercept, anticipate and break up play speaks for itself. And you as someone who watched him, of course, at Real Madrid and then, of course, at Chelsea, you cannot tell me that Claude Makelele is not in the conversation for one of the best, if not players, but definitely the best defensive midfielder of all time.
I don't take anything away from that. Yes, he redefined the position. I agree with everything you're saying. Doesn't make him the best defensive midfielder of all time. Listen, you guys can chime in on the comments on YouTube, but for me, just like there was a Makelele revolution, there was a Sergio Busquets revolution afterwards. He was the pillar of the most, one of the pillars of the most revolutionary team in modern football. Busquets confused people. Busquets confused people that he can be defensive and offensive from the sixth position. The sixth position historically was more limited, and Busquets expanded it into something else. And the reason why Makelele's defensive numbers were better than Busquets' defensive numbers is because Barcelona had the ball the whole time. No, he didn't need to take it away from anybody because they kept possession more than anybody else. That first outlet, the way that on his own axis, he can pivot, change, unmark somebody. You couldn't touch him. And he wasn't necessarily a midfielder that was characterized by blistering pace. He was so good positionally. He was so aware. And then when you complement that trio with Xavi and Iniesta, it's just next level. They set the standard to change football
trio. And
forever.
I could talk about Frank Lampard and Michael Ballack next to this guy, Michael Essien squeezed in.
How many Champions Leagues do they have at Chelsea?
Oh, I see. We're going to do titles again because men lie, women lie, but numbers don't. This has been Nico Cantor JayDee Dyer. You know what time it is, but more importantly, get involved in the conversation. We want to hear from you. Who is the best defensive midfielder of all time? And we'll see you next time.